welcome to the Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the third Sunday in Lent for the week of March 23rd, 2025. And I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to dig into this week's podcast, and I'm excited to talk about a couple different things. One, right off the rip, I've been getting over a flu bug, so if I sound a little bit different this week, that's what's been going on. In fact, if you listen really close last week, I was dealing with it a little bit there, and I feel like I got through it pretty well, but I'm getting through the remnants of it right now. So if it's a little bit different than normal, that's one of the reasons. But I do have a big announcement, and I really am excited about this. So one of the things that we talked about for 2025 is that there was going to be some big changes that are going on. And I will say there's a few additional things that I will continue to hold that I am super excited about that have been progressing here over the last few weeks. And I'm really, really excited about those. But the one that I can announce right now is that live currently, as you are listening to this, there is a Faith and Science podcast YouTube page with every single podcast that I have ever produced on YouTube. Along with, if you've ever dug into the descriptions, I always link the past podcasts where I have talked about the same text at a different time and space. All those links will be to the YouTube links to be able to keep that going. And one of the reasons that I have done this is the podcasting space has changed a lot since I first started this, and that's been one of the things that I have been kind of hoping for, is to use that as a little bit more of organic growth, and along with being able to share it easier. So I've spent a lot of time the last few weeks working on getting all of those over there, making sure everything's linked. I know the new episodes each week, there's a few things that I'm going to have to figure out how to do that, and so it might take a little bit to get all the links and everything straight right after. But going forward, you will have that option as another option. And as you look down in our different social media links, you will see there's a YouTube link that is covering this. And I know as a listener, this probably isn't a huge deal, but for me, it has been something I've been working on for multiple weeks here to be able to get that done. So I'm really excited to be able to bring that forward. I'm hoping that that can lead into some new things. And as I have some foresight on where we're moving to, I think there might be some times and places where the YouTube might bring some additional things to this podcast that it's hard sometimes when you're just having the audio. So I'll just leave the tease there, but am really excited about it. I'm hoping that this becomes another way that you are able to share this podcast, to help being able to have more interaction with us together. I'll try keeping a tabs on what's going on in those YouTube comments, along with all the different other places that we are able to connect. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope that you enjoy that. So, but before we jump into this week's topics, we need to look back to last week and the question, which was, where are you being challenged in your faith, and how are you hoping to grow? Especially when we're in this Lenten season, I think these are really important questions to be having and consistently thinking about and processing, because if we're going to really examine and think about what does it mean to go through this period of time of self-reflection, there's times that we need to get brutally honest with ourselves, and sometimes that's really difficult to do. And one of the responses that we got back this week is from a person who I know pretty well, and there's some major transition that's kind of going on in his life right now, and talking about how this change within his life has been a major part of his faith walk as well. And this then means when I still have this heart, but yet things are changing, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I think for me, I think it means continuing to reach out and connecting with people. But I think also it's one of those moments that is a good reminder for all of us to keep praying through it and trying to listen for where God is trying to steer us next. I think there's a lot of times it's really easy for us to jump and move really quickly, but I think there's also a blessing in slowing down. It's been one of the things that I've so far in Lent been trying to do is take some intentional prayer time and or just 5 minutes to slow down. And I think in a world that goes super fast, sometimes that's easier said than done. And we need that time to slow down, to reflect, to think, to be able to talk with God and just have the world fade away for a little bit. And I think sometimes that's really hard to do. And sometimes it means being intentional. And I think, again, that feeds into this idea of what the reflection time of Lent is really all about. So let's just jump into it this week. The first reading is out of Isaiah chapter 55, the first 9 verses of it. This Old Testament text, I think, plays so beautifully into where we'll be going with the gospel text this week. But it's this recognition coming from Isaiah here of how God provides for us. And the things that God provides satisfy in ways that are so much more than what the world can provide, especially when you're looking at verse 2. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. This idea then of how God provides for us and is willing to provide, but we have to be looking for it. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to be keeping our ears and eyes open for it, not being purely dependent on ourselves, and recognizing when that happens to give praise and glory to God through all of those things. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 63, the first 8 verses of it. And this then is coming off of that from Isaiah, this idea of how our soul longs for God. We long for that sanctuary. We long for the steadfast love that only God can provide. And when we're living in that, and when we are feasting in that, that we are truly satisfied, that we are able to meditate on that, we are able to enjoy the presence of God and recognizing that God is the help and God is the joy, that our soul just clings and wants to continue to be around God. This idea and recognition on how God continues to provide and wants to be in and amongst us and around us and love on us. The second reading or epistle text this week is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the first 13 verses of it. And this is then this recognition on how we need to be sure that we are going after the spiritual food of what God is calling us into. Sometimes we fall short, and it's easy for us to start idolizing different things, or even put it some ways to ourselves. We can do this. We can handle this. Or I have been gifted with this money, so thus I can do this. And forgetting to recognize that God is in all of this. God is the one who is pulling the strings, not us. And in doing that, the recognition then that this then is something of God's. If we don't, we have become more likely to idolatrize whatever that thing is, and this then can start to separate us from God, and thus it forces us to potentially not be feasting on the food that God is intending for us to be feasting on, and feasting on that food that lasts and sustains and helps us to be able to grow long-term and build that relationship. Instead, we can quickly put a divide in ourselves to be able to start saying, this is me, this is God, and then this wedge is created and divides what is supposed to be together. The gospel text this week is out of Luke chapter 13, the first 9 verses of it. And this is one of those moments that yet again, that Jesus is with Galileans who are mingling around, and they ask him, do you think that because these Galileans suffered in a way that they are worse sinners than other Galileans? So this idea of how we're having this separation of people, that there's some that are worse than others. And this then frustrates Jesus, as we'd expect, and we get this parable beginning in verse 6, that a man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit, and there was none. And the man then starts complaining that it's been 3 years and there's been no fruit, and just let's cut this thing down. Why are we wasting the soil? And this is where the gardener hears this and replies, "Sir, let it alone for 1 more year until I dig around it and put manure on it. And if it bears fruit next year, well and good. And if not, you can cut it down." And that's where we're left. We're left on this little bit of a cliffhanger, but I think this is a moment for us to think a little bit deeper on what does this actually mean, and then how does this apply to us, I think, in a really interesting way. So before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we do our shameless plugs. For Working Preacher, if you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between their sermon brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions. Since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to give me some ideas and direction and ways to be looking at this podcast. In fact, with the YouTube project, they were extremely helpful to be able to link different texts together and looking back at different commentaries and when those were all coming out. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org and using that as a reference to help prepare you for the week, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week, along with having the art, the hymns, liturgical colors. But one of the most important things that is on there is daily devotions. These devotions really help continue to move you through the week and keep you in that mindset, that growth mindset. And if we're going to make sure that we're putting in that additional time and work and effort to connect ourselves with God and being able to spend that time with God, let's make sure that we're doing it right and really continuing to tie into the week's themes week after week. Again, a lot of what this podcast is preparing us, whether you're going to be in front of the pews or in the pews on Sunday morning, for the text so that we can go just that little bit deeper and helping us be able to grow. So if you haven't checked out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either an ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies in more of a weekly homily style, or it's as a newsletter that kind of comes out and it brings in some additional ecological ideas and things to be thinking about and implementing, along with having those homilies and commentaries to be looking at and thinking about. And they're coming from more of an ecological lens. So if you enjoy listening to this podcast for a half an hour each week, I know you're going to enjoy that resource over there. And that'll be the first link down in the show notes to make sure to check out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. And finally, there is one more plug that we have to talk about this week, and I'm really excited about it because Gus Davis is having the Gus Davis Faith, Science, and Ethics Camp. And it's a slightly different name this year, but I'm really excited about it. I have attended the last couple years. It's a great program, and I'm really excited about the idea of what they're going for this year, as their topic is the sweet life, ? Getting granular with sugar. And let me just read what we're covering this week in this. Join our exploration of the sweetness that we take for granted. Sugar is a fundamental source of energy in our diets, a cash crop with history tied to slave trade, a key aspect of the processed food which impacts our health, and is featured in many cultural festive dishes from around the world. Fellows will engage in hands-on exploration of what our faith, tradition, and science tell us about the consumption of sugar in the context of our modern lives. The Gus Davis Academy of Faith, Science, and Ethics brings high school students from across the country to learn alongside top scientists and theologians. At the intersections of faith and science, we work together to find solutions to bring some of the world's most pressing challenges. I'm really excited about this. I know I'm in early conversations about how and I'm going to be able to plug in and be part of it this year, but I'm really excited about it. If you are interested in this, please reach out and I can figure out if there's some way I can get a promo code or something of it, but I'm really excited about it. And at minimum, I'm hoping that I can potentially see you there, especially if you're a high school student, to check out this amazing opportunity. Let's dig into this a little bit. what is the gardener really getting at here? I think, and that's one of the first things we need to understand before we can get into a little bit more of the biological to be able to bring this back home around us. Owner of the property is frustrated because the tree hasn't bore fruit. The gardener is suggesting loosening up the soil around the roots, which promotes growth to allow for that plant to grow. And he's also looking at adding fertilizer to make sure that there is enough nutrients for that plant so that that is also eliminated. This is one of those things that this is eliminating multiple different things in one step. This isn't the typical scientific process. This is, we're throwing everything at this year to try to get this to grow. But we have to then recognize, okay, if we're giving it everything to be able to help make sure that the roots are able to grow, to make sure that the nutrients are there for the plant to grow, what then does it take for the plant to bear fruit? And I think sometimes we overlook that aspect. Bearing fruit, as any plant, is extremely energy intensive. You only do it if you are secure in what you are doing. You feel good about the amount of energy that you're producing through your leaves, that you have excess to be able to do this, to be able to then give offspring for the future generations. And we have to think about this then too. When we're thinking about fruit, it's easy for us to think about apples or blueberries or strawberries, but there's multiple different types of fruit. And we have to recognize and understand within those fruits, there is different ideas of how that is going to actually help the plant in the long run. And remember, the whole point of fruit is so that the next generation has the ability to grow. So there's a lot of types of fruits that are like legumes. So like a lot of beans or a bean-like pod where there's multiple different seeds within that. Think of like a pea pod would be one. You have nuts where there's an outer shell protecting the inner. So hazelnuts or acorns would be examples of that. But then we get some that are less common, like samara, which are like those, what I called helicopters as kids, or ones that kind of twirl down and it allows the wind to kind of carry them a little bit away. We can also think about like dandelions at the end of their season as they die, that they have these seeds that are get carried by the wind. We also have some that are fructose drupe, like a coconut or a walnut. But we think about coconuts that we don't even know where they initially originated from. The whole idea is that they would be in this vessel that would be able to float to another place to be able to then find suitable habitat in order for them to grow. And the list goes on and on and on. Different types of fruits like accessory fruits or true berries, having a fleshy outside that either encourages something to eat it or being a source that if it fell on the ground, it gave some initial nutrients for that plant to grow. But this is a lot of work and effort for a plant to do. A plant then is sacrificing of its own self to recognize the possibility of being able to pass that on to future generations. And what does this plant have to do? This plant has to have hope. Hope that there's going to continue to be this food and nutrients that it's needing to be able to grow, that the sun is going to continue to be there enough so it can continue to produce ATP to be able to grow as a plant and be able to provide for this fruit so that it's able to give its potential future offspring as best of an opportunity as possible. But as any parent will tell you, there is a lot of sacrifice that goes into that. But there's also trust in things that are outside of the control of the plant. We have to have the courage to be able to step out and have faith and trust in that there will continue to be nutrients there, that they will continue to get rain, that it will continue to get the nutrients that it's needing so that it can continue to grow. When we look at the text that we had this last week, we see reminders of this, that God is around us trying to give us these things that will sustain our growth, that will sustain us through the hard times. And when we think about putting down manure at the base of the tree, giving it that natural nitrogen that plant is needing to grow, that is awesome. It is giving it essential nutrients for that plant to be able to grow and grow well. But just having that present does not mean that the plant is going to grow. Just because we water the plant doesn't mean that plant is going to grow. The nutrients have to be there and the conditions around it need to be there. But also the plant has to have the desire to take those nutrients and do the work to be able to grow the fruit. You talk to any gardener, and I've the last few years have done a little bit of gardening, not a lot, but a little bit. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of thinking about and planning things and making sure that you're trying to make sure that the nutrients and stuff are down, making sure that you're watering the plants or that they're getting enough water. But there is an aspect where the plants just got to do what they're going to do. You can help them, you can steer them, you can trim them, you can do all these things to help them. But in the end, it's out of your control. In the end, there is faith that it takes that the plant is going to take that leap of faith and recognize that there is things here that you need and to just grow. And that's a big step. It's a lot of energy to be putting into getting the genetic material, making sure that all the things that a potential offspring are going to need are all there, along with making it appealing however your dispersal method, whether it is through eating and consumption by animals, when you think about raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, or having something of wind dispersal or water dispersal or some type of catapulting device, or you're dependent on different conditions for your seeds to be flung out, as we've talked about recently, like fire. There is then this aspect of, okay, whatever our preconceived notion was, great. And now we're going to have faith and trust that this is going to happen. The gardener is saying, I'm going to give this plant as best of conditions as we possibly can. And then it's up to the plant to make the decision. And as I thought about this text a lot this week, I started thinking about the three characters. The man, I kind of see as God of the Old Testament. I could see where God's saying, nothing is happening here. What am I doing with this? These people that I've been working with, they don't get it. And how often the prophets being finalized with Jesus Christ, stating, don't give up on these people. I'm going to go in, I'm going to put in some additional work, I'm going to give it the best opportunity that they possibly can have. And then it's up to them. And that's the thing when you think about seeds, and you think about the plants, when they produce these offspring, there is that aspect at the end that they have given everything. They've grown the tomato, they've grown the blueberry, they've grown this thing. And however their dispersal, whether it's just dropping nearby or the wind taking it or we pick it or something else picks it. And then there's this aspect of, I have to trust what's going to happen next. I think that is a part that as people, we take certain aspects of that for granted. And there's certain aspects of that we overlook consistently. So when I think about, I plant different plants into the garden, and I know that not everyone is going to be successful, but my plan is that the majority of them are going to be successful so that I can harvest the fruit of their labor and my labor too, to be able to then have meals in the fall and into the winter. That is my plan. That is what I am expecting. That is my hope. And then I'm going to put a lot of work and effort into that, and I'm going to bank on that plant doing the same thing when I am sitting in my garden. But I think there's a lot of times that we don't give acknowledgement to all the little things that God has done behind the scenes for us. The gift of being able to hear, the gift of being able to walk or run or talk, or the gifts that we have that we're in the different situations that we are. There's always a blessing that we can find. Have we spent the time to acknowledge it, or have we come to expect it? And I think that's when we forget to do that, that's like what the psalm is warning us about. That we start becoming truly about ourselves and saying that we are doing this work. And we forget that God's in the whole thing. There is a risk to a plant producing offspring in the shape of a fruit. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. And if they aren't able to do it, it rots on the tree and it's been unsuccessful. And there's still things that are out of their control that could kill the whole thing. An early frost in the fall, a late frost in the spring, disease, drought, flood. There's so many of these variables that pop up that could totally change things, but yet they still have the faith and the courage to go forward. The conditions are right. They're going to give it a shot. So the question I have for you this week is, where are we ignoring blessings around us? Where are we ignoring blessings around us? And where do we need to take a step out in faith? And where do we need to take a step out in faith? The fig tree is in the parable being banked on it's going to take a step out in faith. They're going to give it the best conditions that it can to give it the best opportunity to produce the figs. And hoping that by doing that, that's what it's needing in order for it to happen. And I think in our lives, there's a lot of things that hold us back. I think sometimes it's acknowledging the gifts of what God is doing around us. I think it's sometimes also that we don't even recognize that all the conditions are right for us, that what's the harm in trying? And that's part of this crazy Lenten season. It's supposed to be hard and difficult and lots of self-reflection and figuring out how do we work through these different things that we figure out about ourselves. How do we work through these things that we recognize about our communities or church or world? And maybe we can't change all of it, but maybe we can figure out some small way to make an impact. And is that not what God calls us into? Is that not us recognizing the gifts around us? Is that not also acknowledging the apple tree that's bearing fruit? That, yeah, cool, the conditions were right. And it took that leap of faith to be able to provide fruit so that I can even enjoy it. That's amazing. I think there's a lot of times that we miss that beauty around us. And I think that's part of what I feel Lent should get us to. This moment of how amazing all these little gifts are around us. To be able to get to how amazing Christ's gift was to us. But we're not there yet. We're still in this moment of understanding all this. And I think we start recognizing that if a tree can take that leap, or a plant in my garden can take that leap, maybe I need to take that leap to allow myself the possibility to see more blessings, what God is doing around me every day. So we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.